Welcome to another special edition of Daily Dose, and excited to be back in Papyrus 967, which we introduced in the last video. Very, very important ancient manuscript of a handful of books from the Greek Old Testament. Last go around, we studied it mostly from the perspective of Daniel, and we looked at a very, very fascinating part of Daniel 7. Today, we're going to look at it mostly from the perspective of Ezekiel. Let's begin with a bit of a review, since you may either not recall it or haven't watched the video. Just to remind you of where we are, we're looking at a manuscript that dates to either the 2nd or 3rd century AD, depending on your assumptions. And as it has survived here, it's portions of Ezekiel, Daniel, the expanded Daniel corpus, Bel and the Dragon and Susanna, as well as portions of Esther are found in the surviving portions of it, several dozen pages. It was initially brought to light in the 1930s, and over the time, on the antiquities market, more and more kept coming out, and it ended up in 5 different places. So portions are in Dublin, part of the Chester Beatty collection, portions in Princeton, portions in Cologne, Germany, Madrid, and Montserrat. And as you may recall, its dimensions are quite interesting as well. It's very tall and very narrow, as you can see, although some holding institutions maybe just have like a bottom half or just a top half. A few of them have these whole pages. So it's quite interesting in terms of its codicology. So we looked at that last time. Now let's dive in a bit on Ezekiel. So as I introduced last time, it's very clear that the scribe of P967 in Ezekiel is different than the scribe who copied the Daniel corpus. And one scholar has described the handwriting this way: the Ezekiel hand is large, it's square in build, although that's fairly typical for the majuscule in this time period. It's very clear, but it's heavy, and you can actually tell it's a bit blobbier, it's a bit thicker, and by no means elegant, unevenly written, and unevenly spaced. And if you're familiar with papyri in this kind of context, that does kind of check out. I'm not a very gifted paleographer, but you can tell. And in fact, if we just put on screen here, here's a portion from the Daniel bits. We looked at this last time. And even if you're not an expert, if you know some Greek, you can tell that there are some differences. So for instance, if you compare the kappa with this kappa, you can see how the ductus, or the specific way in which that letter is formed, is quite different. You can also see it with the alpha. So compare this alpha with, say, this one or this one. You can see they're quite different as well. And you can do some other comparisons as well. So I think it's pretty safe assumption that they are different scribes. A couple other things to point out in terms of the scribe of Ezekiel here. You'll see, and we'll see another of these in future examples that we'll get into in here in a bit, is that this scribe does use nomina sacra here. So you can see that. So this will be the word for kyrios. So you got the kappa plus the sigma and the over bar. That confirms that this is a Christian scribe, most likely, who is passing this on, who's copying this. You also see some paragraph outdentation. So this is ekthesis. We've seen this in prior videos with like Vaticanus and so forth. So it's jutted into the margin to indicate a new paragraph. And so you do see that pretty much throughout this manuscript as well. So a few interesting features to point out there. Lastly, and more importantly, there are significant differences between the text of P96 in Ezekiel, so we're focusing on Ezekiel here, between what we have in this manuscript from, call it, the 2nd or 3rd century AD, and what we see in the Masoretic, or the generally agreed upon Old Greek that we find in other manuscripts. So first off, there are some major omissions. There's a lot of little small stuff, but a few of the big ones, it's missing Ezekiel 12, 26 through 28, which is God's promise that his word will indeed come to pass. It's missing 32 verses 24 to 26, which is part of the sequence of judgments on other nations. And perhaps most interestingly, in terms of omissions, it is missing Ezekiel 36, 23, the last bit, all the way up through 38, which is the whole section, which I love, by the way, and it has a lot of interesting connections to John 3, by the way, in terms of New Testament connections. But this whole passage is about how God is going to purify his people. He's going to wash them with water, give them a new heart, rip out the heart of stone, give them a heart of flesh, and so on. And so that not only shows up in John 3, it also impacts 2 Corinthians 3 in terms of the new covenant and the Spirit writing on fleshly hearts. So it's really, really interesting then that this manuscript has essentially omitted that portion. Not 100% sure why. Perhaps most notably, though, is that chapter 37 is after chapters 38 and 39. It's a transposition. Chapter 37 is the Valley of Dry Bones, very, very famous passage, has implications for resurrection and so forth. Chapters 38 and 39 are the Battle of Gog and Magog. And so in this particular manuscript, these are switched. And so you have the Valley of Dry Bones come after the battle, which very much does impact the way you would read all of that. Instead of having this vision of restoration followed by this kind of apocalyptic battle, it goes the other way. And so that is quite significant. And that particular order is only ever found elsewhere in one somewhat later Latin manuscript that you see that as well. And it may very well be drawing on either this manuscript or its exemplar. Because of that, some scholars have argued that the text of Ezekiel in P967 is a different tradition and perhaps is drawing on a different Hebrew tradition. Maybe there was a parallel tradition compared to the Proto-Masoretic. This has been argued most recently in the book by Ingrid Lilly, Two Books of Ezekiel. It's part of the Vetus Testamentum supplement series from about a decade ago. So a very interesting argument, trying to grapple with what are the implications of such significant differences in the text here. So some of the background here is quite significant. Let me actually show you what this looks like. Now, I wasn't able personally to track down where chapters 38 and 39 begin, but I was able to track down the ending or the sort of the transition bit. So we'll read more here in a second, but the end of Ezekiel 37, which remember that's the dry bones section, you read this. So you've got the kurios, notice the nomen sacrum here, so kurios, hagiadzo, and I've covered some of it up. Then you got the to, ani, the articular infinitive of ami, blah, blah, blah. You've got meso, altone, and then it ends with the iona here. So that's the end of chapter 37. So if you were in the Old Greek that we normally know, or the Masoretic, or your English Bible, it's going to go directly into chapter 38. That's what you would expect. However, the very next line, it's kai, egenita, et cetera, into pimpto, kai, et cetera, it's in the 25th month, or 25th year, et cetera, of the Eichmelosia of our exile. That's Ezekiel 40, verse 1. So notice, with just a raised dot here, you do, and as well as a ekthesis, you go straight from 37 into 40 because 37's been moved, and then 38 and 39 are prior to 37. So that gives you a feel for what this looks like in the manuscript, where you have that immediate transition from 37 to 40. So that's what that looks like. So the dry bones have moved. Interesting stuff. Well, let's do some reading. We're going to continue in Ezekiel 37 here. First thing I'll point out, for the folios that have survived that are essentially intact, that are not just like the middle or the bottom of the page, you will often see a page number at the top, typically of the recto side. So that would be the sort of facing side on the right-hand side. And this one's pretty interesting. This letter here is not probably something that you would be familiar with. I certainly wasn't, because it's a bit of a strange letter formation. This is actually from the Greek kappa here. It's got a weird form in this particular scribal hand. And even though it's a letter that did used to exist in the sort of classical, pre-classical period, it doesn't exist. It's not being used as a letter, at least in the Koine or post-classical period. It still did survive as a number marker. It's the tens place for the number 90. Then you see the alpha there. That's 1. So the total here is 91. So we're on the 91st page, if you will. So that's kind of cool. Let's do a bit of reading. You'll see this is Ezekiel 37, verse 4. And we're going to pick up with the pros me. And you see the P-R-O, phi, A, eta, T, U, son. So prophetuson, an imperative. So this is God speaking to me, prophesy. And then epi, and then next line, ta. Actually, I can show you this here. So let's go ahead and do that. There is a chi apin that would be on the prior page, so it's kind of off screen. It would have been up here. And he said, then prosme to me, prophetuson epi. So this is God telling Ezekiel to prophesy. And then we have ta, asta, so O-S-T-A. That is bones. That's where we get like osteoporosis or what have you. And it's tauta, these bones. Notice a little raised dot here, a little punctuation. Essentially saying, all right, well, comma or something like that. I'm giving you instructions. All right, this is a marker within the sentence of some sort of structure. Then you have a chi. And then erase, which is not some weird verb. That's just the future of Lego, as you probably remember. Second singular ending. So you will say, erase some stuff here. And then it starts with an AU, it continues on the next line, tois. So you'll say to them. And this actually starts the quoted text. I'm kind of surprised the scribe didn't use one of these markers there to indicate it. So ta, so the neuter plural, asta, the bones, then ta, and then you have, this is, even though it looks kind of weird, remember this is magic school handwriting, so this is your xi, or that in the lowercase. That's what it looks like for this scribe. It's zera, that means dry, and then tauta. So say to these dry bones, or excuse me, the dry bones, these dry bones. Next section, moving up just a bit. So we're picking up here. Acousate, so listen. Listen to what? Log on. And then we have nomen sacrum here, kuriou, tade, which is this or thus. So acousate, log on. Notice it is kuriou. They've got that genitive marker there, that upsilon, that indicates what the case is. Thus says the Lord. So this says, or listen to this word of the Lord, and he says this, tade lege. Thus says, once we have the kurios again, notice it's ha theos. There's the nomen sacrum for theos here. You can see I filled that in. Tois asteioi. So that's the dative plural form of the bones. And then it's two tois, these. So it's quite repetitive here, but it's God telling Isaiah to prophesy to the bones. And when he prophesies to the bones, he's supposed to say, thus says the Lord God to the bones, to these bones. And then finally we have idu, ego, epago, behold, I am bringing upon you, and so forth. So just wanted to kind of get your feet wet into reading a few lines from this manuscript. Hopefully that was fun. So that's it for now for P967. It's possible I'll come back to it down the road. Perhaps if we're taking a look at Susanna or something like that, maybe we'll revisit it. But hopefully this has been a fun little introduction to a very, very significant papyrus, not only in the text history of Daniel, as we saw last time, but as you can tell, in the text history of Ezekiel. So a lot of further avenues for research have been opened up by this papyrus. I don't think we've exhausted everything yet in terms of what we can learn from it and how it reflects some very interesting stuff in the circulation and the copying of this set of books, including Daniel, the Daniel corpus, Ezekiel, and Esther. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Thanks for tuning in.